All right, let's dive straight into an explainer that takes a seriously bizarre aviation incident, the 1971 Ganga hijacking, and unwraps it into a full-blown geopolitical spy thriller. I mean, we're talking about an event that literally redrew the map of South Asia. We're looking at the hijacking of an Indian Airlines flight named the Ganga, and it sits right at this crazy collision point of shadow intelligence operations, high-stakes diplomatic maneuvering, and the violent birth of a completely new nation. It's one of those stories that forces us to stop and ask, are we looking at a genuine act of terror, high-stakes treason, or just a perfectly executed trap?
It sounds like a punchline to a joke, doesn't it? A toy gun and a wooden grenade. But seriously, I want you to keep this exact question in mind as we peel back the layers of this whole hijacking. Because we're going to look at an incident where absolutely nothing, and I mean nothing, is as it seems. What starts off looking like your standard, albeit terrifying hijacking narrative, very quickly devolves into this insane maze of double agents, sweeping geopolitical strategy, and real, devastating human consequences that reshaped the entire subcontinent.
Now, the official timeline here moves at absolutely breakneck speed. On January 30th, 1971, a Fokker F-27 aircraft flying from Srinagar to Jammu gets hijacked by two Kashmiri teenagers and is suddenly diverted to Lahore, Pakistan. By February 2nd, that same plane is just a burning wreck on the tarmac. And then, boom, just 2 days later on February 4th, India slaps a total ban on Pakistani overflights. So, in just 5 short days, we go from a hijacked domestic flight to a complete, total shutdown of the skies.
80 hours. That is the number of incredibly tense hours that aircraft just sat there on the tarmac at Lahore airport. Picture this. It's completely surrounded by the Pakistani armed forces, while the two teenage hijackers, Hashim and Ashraf Qureshi, are locked inside, demanding the release of 36 prisoners held in Indian jails. During this intense standoff, the actual passengers and crew were released and safely sent back to India by road, which, just left the hijackers totally alone with the aircraft.
And initially, the hijackers were lauded as absolute heroes by the Pakistani leadership and the press. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who was a massive political figure in Pakistan at the time, literally went directly to the airport to meet them in person. This highly publicized meeting seemingly cemented the narrative, right? It looked like a daring Kashmiri separatist operation conducted by the National Liberation Front, striking this massive symbolic blow against India.
But once the hostages were gone and the plane was mysteriously set on fire and completely destroyed, that whole heroic narrative really began to crack. As the smoke literally cleared from the Lahore tarmac, these glaring anomalies began to pop up. Things just didn't add up. Investigators from both sides of the border started looking at the finer details of the operation, and they quickly realized something was deeply, deeply wrong with the official story.
I mean, when you look closely at the actual aircraft involved, the Ganga, things get seriously weird. We're talking about an ancient, obsolete plane that had been totally withdrawn from regular service 5 years prior. Yet mysteriously, it gets placed back on this specific route just days before the hijack. And the weapons, get this, when Pakistani authorities finally investigated, they found the hijackers had taken over the plane using a child's toy gun and a grenade carved entirely out of wood. Seriously, why would Indian Airlines suddenly revive a retired plane, and how on earth does a hijacking succeed with wooden toys?
Well, here is where the story takes a massive pivot. According to multiple intelligence sources, including a later book by a former R&AW officer, the lead hijacker, Hashim Qureshi, wasn't exactly acting on his own. Actually, he'd been intercepted by the Indian Border Security Force weeks earlier while trying to cross the border with real weapons. Facing some pretty severe persecution, sources suggest he was basically turned into a double agent by the legendary R&AW chief R&AW.
So the crucial takeaway here is that this wasn't some sudden, spontaneous terror attack. Sources suggest it was a carefully choreographed intelligence masterstroke. First, Qureshi gets intercepted. Then he's recruited by Indian intelligence and literally hidden away in a safe house down in Bangalore. Finally, he's instructed to execute the hijacking as a false flag operation. He was apparently told to demand that meeting with Bhutto to ensure maximum political visibility, deliberately implicating the Pakistani state in the crisis right in front of the world's cameras.
As an impartial observer, it's just fascinating to see how the sources present two completely contradictory national narratives that just collided head-on over this burning wreckage. On one side, India officially claimed this was a blatant act of Pakistan-sponsored terrorism, using that powerful visual of Bhutto meeting the hijackers as absolute proof. On the flip side, Pakistan, after running their own judicial inquiry, claimed it was an elaborate Indian conspiracy meticulously designed to provoke a crisis.
But you have to ask yourself, why go through all this trouble? Well, because the hijacking wasn't actually the main event. It was a Trojan horse. India used the destruction of the Ganga, which, remember, was a retired, nearly worthless aircraft, as the perfect legal and diplomatic pretext to ban all Pakistani flights, both civil and military, right over Indian airspace starting February 4th. To really grasp the geopolitical genius, or devastation, depending on where you're standing, of this move, you have to look at the flight paths. At the time, remember, Pakistan was geographically split into West Pakistan and East Pakistan, separated entirely by a massive stretch of India. Before the ban, flying between the two wings was a straight shot, about 3 hours over 1,000 miles of Indian airspace. After the ban, Pakistani aircraft were forced to fly all the way south, looping around the entire tip of India via Colombo in Sri Lanka.
That detour balloons the journey to 3,000 miles. Just try to imagine the sheer exhaustion, the massive, crippling increase in fuel consumption, and the immense economic drain of an emergency 3,000-mile detour for every single flight. And, timing is literally everything here. This ban was implemented exactly as West Pakistan was trying to mobilize military reinforcements and critical supplies to East Pakistan to suppress a rapidly rising Bengali nationalist movement.
The geopolitical trap snapped shut flawlessly, causing the immediate logistical strangulation of West Pakistan. It completely severed that crucial direct aerial link to the east. Now, Sri Lanka did provide a critical refueling lifeline at Bandaranaike Airport, but the immense delay and staggering costs still severely hampered the Pakistani military's logistics. Ultimately, this airspace ban catalyzed the conditions that would heavily influence the outcome of the impending civil war, setting the stage for the creation of Bangladesh later that same year. It's really easy to look at this strictly as an incredible game of 3D geopolitical chess, but we have to connect this grand strategy back to the reality on the ground. Beyond the high-level chessboard of espionage and war, there was a very real, very devastating human fallout. We have to look at the peripheral victims, the people whose lives were just quietly destroyed in the shadows of this massive intelligence operation.
Once the Pakistani inquiry concluded this was an Indian plot, those former heroes, they were instantly branded as spies. And this sparked absolute mass paranoia. Around 150 Kashmiri men were suddenly arrested and held in the Lahore fort, with many reportedly facing severe torture. Hashim Qureshi himself ended up jailed for 9 years. But the crackdown also swept up entirely innocent civilians, like a Kashmiri businessman named Javed Butt, who had simply donated some money to the Kashmiri cause, completely and totally unaware of any hijacking plot.
To truly understand the collateral damage here, just consider the heartbreaking reality for Javed Butt's family. One source details how his minor financial support to the separatists led to him being swept up in those frantic post-hijacking arrests and thrown into a Lahore jail. While he was locked away, being aggressively interrogated over a spy plot he literally knew nothing about, his wife was diagnosed with cancer and passed away. She was buried quickly, completely alone, without her husband or her children allowed to be around her.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, you're left with one final, lingering question. Was the hijacking of the Ganga the desperate spark of a rebellion, or was it the ultimate intelligence trap, one that sacrificed innocent lives to birth a new nation? History is rarely simple, right? And in this incredible 1971 geopolitical thriller, you really have to stop and wonder, who were the real pawns? Thanks for exploring this with me, and keep questioning the narratives.